This week's show is sponsored by Avlia Mediterranean Folk Embroidery at avlia.life, avlea.life. Krista West, designer and owner of Avlia, has 4 new designs. The first one is the Bit Kit, and that is called Roman Mosaic, and it's a green design, a rare thing for her. But the Bit Kits are something worth checking out because they are exactly that. They're just little tiny kits that can make a little small placemat or something to put under a flower pot. But the nice thing about these kits is so many of Krista's designs are repeatable patterns. So that bit kit gives you a pattern that you can really make as large as you want. Then also new is Tansy, and then Thessaly Floral Hoop Kit. And the Thessaly Floral Hoop Kit is based on a brass tray design that Krista found in Thessalonica, and that is an embroidery kit with several stitches. So if you're looking for a small design that will give you a variety of stitches to learn and work with, the Thessaly Floral Hoop Kit is what you want to look for, and that is exactly that, a hoop kit. So you get thread, cloth, needle, and a hoop. So everything you need except scissors to do this kit. And then a beautiful piece, really beautiful piece, the Anafi Diamante Table Runner. Krista's been showing this for some time now, and it's now available. A gorgeous piece, as are all of her table runners. But be sure and check that out. That's just for Krista is an absolute design machine. So if you want to keep up and see what new designs she has coming, follow her on Instagram, subscribe to her YouTube channel, but find some way to follow her to keep up, because she just cranks them out left and right, and she doesn't wait to release a bunch at once. She just releases them as she has them, so it's a pretty steady stream. And you can, of course, get all of her designs at avlia.life. And now, on to the show. Welcome back. I'm Gary Parr, and you are listening to Fiber Talk, the twice-weekly podcast for needlework artists. Our artist this week, Cindy Lee Gershon. Cindy, welcome.
Thank you, Gary. Nice to be here.
Oh, glad to have you. You volunteered. Oh, you're my new hero. You volunteered.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here to share whatever I can share with everyone. And I know you guys were looking for someone to speak to about judging for a while, so
yes,
that's why I reached.
Yeah, and I appreciate it because I have been looking for someone who's willing. And so, yes, our subject this week is really needlework from the judge's perspective, and the goal is to give you things to watch out for in your stitching, things to do, things to not do that will improve your stitching, and of course, all constructive. But just to help you out, so give you some tips. And this is one of those 1-2 punch shows. So you'll be listening to this on July 25. And then on the 28th, our stitch hour at 8 o'clock Eastern time on the YouTube channel on the 28th, then Cindy will return, and she's put together a bunch of photos of examples. And so then you'll be able to join us, and she'll take us through, and we'll look at examples of good, bad, indifferent stitching, whatever it is. And then as part of the audience, as we always do in the live shows, then you'll be able to ask questions and explore some things further with the visuals on the screen. So be a 1-2 punch to help you improve your needlework is really what we're after here. So really appreciate it, Cindy. It's going to be fun.
Oh, my pleasure. I've been looking forward to it.
So now, all right, you're one of those full metal people. So we got EGA Master Craftsman, A&G Certified Master Needle Art Appraiser, and EGA Certified Needlework Judge. I mean, that's a lot of study and a lot of work, but I assume there's some years ahead of that where you were just a regular stitcher like the rest of us.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I started off when I was a little kid. You know, my mom was always bringing home different craft kits, you know, anywhere from paint by numbers and the little, you know, the pot holders with the loom weaving.
Uh-huh.
Eventually, she brought home some stamped cross stitch stuff, like stamp designs where you kind of had to make up your own stitches. And I snuck out of the cupboard her old Good Housekeeping reference book that had a bunch of embroidery stitches in it. And I am mostly self-taught up to that point. Knit and crocheted through college. And when I first got married, I decided to make a few things for the house, and I started getting back into some stamped cross stitch and then some counted cross stitch. And then I started discovering some specialty stitches. And then I started looking through some magazines to see were there any clubs or groups that I could meet with other people and learn more things. And I came across EGA and ANG and joined them as a member at large. And then someone from the local EGA chapter reached out and said, hey, we have a nice group that meets not too far from where you live, and we would love to have you come join us as a guest. And they reeled me in. And I learned all sorts of new stitches. I went to I'm in California. At the time, they were having the Spirit of Cross Stitch festivals up in Sacramento every year. Wow. And I would do that and meet up with my pals up there. And so I learned a lot. I was on the board of several chapters in various capacities. And I kept stitching and learning more. And one of my good friends at that EGA group kept saying to me, Miss Cindy, you are a very good stitcher, and you really need to enter your stuff in the Los Angeles County Fair with the rest of us. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not for me.
And not just your local farm town fair, but the Los Angeles County Fair. Okay.
Yeah, which is a big fair out here. And she kept saying, no, you must enter. So finally I did. And I entered a number of pieces. And to my great surprise, I did very well. So I entered the next year and the year after. And a couple of times, if I can brag on my own part a little bit, I had won Best of Show at 2 different times at LA County. And at that time, if you won Best of Show, you were invited to the State Fair in Sacramento to exhibit those pieces in a competition that were all of the Best of Show winners. And I won that one twice. And that was a big fancy ribbon with fringe.
I mean, that's just flat out a big deal in a state that size. Holy smokes.
It was, and we flew up to Sacramento both times, my husband and I, to go to the opening. We were invited. So that was a lot of fun. And I got to the point where I was doing very well with the shows, and I wanted to go to the next step. I looked into the EGA Master Craftsman program and counted thread because they have various programs. And it took me several years, and I worked very nicely through that program and loved it, had a great time, learned some fantastic stitching habits. And then I said, I'd like to do something a little bit more. I'm exhibiting.
Let me back you up though a little bit. Through all of these exhibits at the fairs and the judging, what was your experience with judges? Good and bad, mostly good?
Generally pretty good. At that level, they didn't really give you a whole lot of written feedback. So you would just sort of see your scores, if I remember right, and know what you had placed. Oh, okay. I had one lady comment on the score sheet saying, you should be a member of EGA, and I laughed because I already was. I was like, yeah, that's a good point. But then I started to become a judge, which I absolutely love doing. I love handling all of the needlework. Yeah. And then a few years after that, I decided to go even further, but in a different direction, and also get my appraiser certification from ANG.
Mm-hmm. Take us through that judging process, becoming a judge. Obviously a lot of studying of other people's needlework. Is it a lot of an apprentice approach to it? How do you learn the skills basically?
Well, at the time I did it, and I believe it's still the same because I work with the program a little bit with a committee. At the time I did it, everyone is assigned a mentor, which I believe is still the same. So as I started the program, I have a specific teacher that I work with and who guides me through what is generally a self-directed program. Okay. But she would guide me and give me feedback. And then at certain points, I have to turn in assignments to her. I have to turn in book reviews. There's certain goals, learning goals. I'm trying to remember what they are. It's been so long. That we learn, and we learn everywhere from what to look for, techniques, original designs, color, critique writing, critique phrasing, how to, score pieces. Everyone looks at things a little bit differently, so
Yeah.
it's nice that each judge is an individual person, so you put your own into it. But there are certain, I'll use the word standards, that we should follow, because there really should be somewhat of a consistency to judging. It's not looking at a piece and going, ooh, that's really pretty, I love that, and I'm going to score.
Yeah, see, that's where my question lies, because
Right.
it's, I think in a lot of people's minds it's an assumption that that judges are people who just see a lot of needlework and they can go up and say, yeah, that one's well done, no, that isn't well done. But behind that, there, like you said, there are standards. There's reasons why it's well done, and I think people don't appreciate fully that there's a mechanism behind that. It isn't just your personal preference.
Correct. And each show is a little bit different, but the general things that are scored from show to show is, of course, technique, color and design, finishing presentation as to, the matting and framing, or if it's finished as a stand-up object, or if it's finished as a table piece. Technique, as I said, is to me a really big portion. When you get into color and design, there are different standards as to whether you're doing your own piece as an original piece, or you're doing a class piece, or you're working independently from a kit that you either purchased all the materials or purchased the chart and put together your own materials.
Mm-hmm.
So there's several standards, and under them there's a bunch of subheadings as to how you look at things. My big thing is I like the technical aspect because of my master craftsman background. So that's my joy, is when I actually get to look at something and admire the technicality. I mean, when I first look at a piece, when it's presented, when we're judging, I will look at it and my first thought is, oh, gee, that's pretty. Or, my personal taste kicks into a little bit. You can't help it.
Right.
But then I immediately switch over into the judging and go, okay, now let's take a look at that. It's entered in, say, the counted cross-stitch category. Is that in the correct category? Okay. Does it meet the requirements? Are all those cross stitches counted crossed the right way? Are there any missing stitches? Are there any errors? Is anything crossed backwards? If there's compensation stitches, is the compensation done correctly? Is any missing? Is any in the wrong direction?
Yeah.
Needle points, similar standards.
Okay, so fair to say then that if I put 5 judges in a room, each of them would have an initial approach to a piece depending on their personal perspective. So one might look at it as a piece of art. One might, like you would look at it technically. Someone might be kind of a hybrid. Another person might start, the perspective would be from the presentation and then work back. But you all eventually cover the various aspects as you're judging.
Absolutely. And sometimes we work, say there's several judges. Some of the shows I work seem to have about 3 judges, 2 or 3. And in some situations, we sort of, while we work individually and score things individually, we come together at the end and score it as a group. And we all sort of seem to have the same opinions. And, if we see something that's not quite right or something that is done exceptionally well, we all seem to generally have the same feeling for it. In other shows, things are judged by the judges very individually. It depends on the size of the show, how many judges, what the show committee wants from you. Mm-hmm. Some committees say, let me back up for a second. There's 2 methods of judging. In one of them, your piece, say you're entering a category and you're being judged against 8 pieces in the same exact class and category. In one method of judging, each piece is judged against the entire group. So it falls wherever it falls, 1 through 8 in that particular category. And there's 1 first place ribbon, 1 second place ribbon, and 1 third place ribbon in general terms. The other method of judging, which is when you go to a show and you say, well, why are there all these first place ribbons and second place ribbons? And I don't understand. The other method of judging, you judge each individual piece simply on its own merits.
Oh, okay.
So it allows you to have multiple ribbons of the same award within an individual category. And that's up to the judging chairman and the show committee that you are being hired by. They will usually at a kickoff meeting say, okay, this is what we want. This is the style of judging. We want you to be generous with ribbons, or we want you to be a little more stringent with ribbons. And this is what we would like to have the show come out to be for everyone.
So, but in that instance, then immediately I'm preferring that, because in that instance, you're being evaluated, and if you get a ribbon, then you know that your needlework is on a par with the best in that group. Where if you are 1, 2, 3 and you are the third position, whatever is that you are 2 tiers less, when you may not be. It may just be subtle differences that made you third. So there's a difference there that might give be educational for people.
Correct. And I also think too, it depends on the type of show. I've judged anywhere from, local fairs to county to some regional work. And it just depends on, again, what the show committee wants. I find sometimes in the maybe upper level fairs where you're getting people that are more experienced stitchers stitching at a higher level, they sometimes like to limit the ribbons a little bit because of the type of show it is.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Other times they come and they go, no, we would like to award as many ribbons as legitimately are worthy of having them, so that, we have a nice show and people get some great feedback, and we're going to have you write critiques.
Yeah. Well, see, and that's all right. So that's where because you start to get into that participation medal territory, which is not productive, in my opinion, for anyone. But if you are being judged on the merits of your own work, and there's a constructive critique with it, then you as a participant, to me, walk away with much more for your effort than if you got, say, best in show and very little input. So, okay, I can see the benefits of both, but I'm telling you, I prefer the one where we have more people getting ribbons because it's done on individual merit. That's interesting.
Right. And again, it just depends on the type of show and what the show committee wants.
Yeah.
And to me, I've exhibited for quite a few years, and I'm kind of fine either way. But again, I generally do relatively well. So,
right.
I usually walk away with something.
Yeah. Now, when you were going through the judging education process, do you start with your mentor and your work as a base in terms of learning? How do you get off the ground in terms of knowing what's good and what isn't?
First of all, you start reading and learning a lot about various techniques, because you have to have a very extensive background to judge shows. And then we started, when I did it, and again, this was around very late 1990s, maybe around 1998 or so, I think is when I got my we're talking judging, 2007,
yeah.
a couple years later. And we did some work through slides that were provided for me, sort of like a mock judging.
Okay.
Of course, seeing things in person is always ideal. We're very lucky here in Southern California. While we don't have a lot of shows, we always seem to have a really big guild-sponsored show every other year, plus the various county fairs. So I would go to the different shows with my mock judging sheets and get permission from the people that were running the show to do this. And I would,
okay. So there's where the practice comes in. Okay.
and yeah, and now they were hung. They had already been judged, so they were already hanging in with their ribbons, and I had to go in and tell myself I must be impartial regardless of what is or is not posted on those hanging pieces, make my own notes, make my own critiques. Disadvantage is you can't get your nose right up onto them with your magnifier to look at them closely. But that's sort of how you start training. And then I was lucky that I was allowed at a large local show to work with some very experienced and knowledgeable judges. They allowed me to come, and I worked, actually, one of the ladies was having trouble with her hand, and she asked would I come be her scribe so I could sit in the room with her because she needed some assistance that day, and I could hear the judges discussing what they were looking at, and just sort of be a very quiet fly in the wall. And that was a really big honor for me because of who the people were at the time, and it was very nice of the show committee to allow me to do that. But it was a phenomenal day of training. Or couple days.
I'll bet. Yeah.
And then you get out and start trying to get some work, and having to be confident to be able to do it, and be skilled that you understand the techniques and you understand about color and you understand about design where appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And
now, all right. Now, so that's another question then. When you're learning to become a judge, then does that almost compel you to start to at least expose yourself to different techniques? Like if you're a cross stitcher, you need to go try some needlepoint to at least have done it.
Yeah, I find when I can, I will do a lot of reading about things, and I'm very good mechanically. I can sort of absorb and picture the techniques. So I have a good general coverage of most of the things that I run into. However, when I can, I try to attend classes locally or regionally or nationally with teachers and take classes in techniques that I have not put my hands on so that I have the practical knowledge about it. One of the ones that I have not had any hands-on experience yet that I have been really wanting to do one day, but it's not close to me, is I would really like to learn some of the basics of Japanese embroidery.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
I have fabulous books in my library, and so I understand some of the technical aspects of it, but that's still never the same as actually doing it. And we do have several people here in Southern California that do some absolutely phenomenal Japanese needlework, and I do see them at the shows, and I've been lucky that I have worked with a couple of judges that do Japanese embroidery, and one of them used to teach Japanese embroidery, I believe. And so when you're there, even as a judge, you're always learning. So if someone knows something more than you do about a technique, they will kindly take a couple of minutes and point out something that you may not know that's more advanced. But that's something that I would like to learn more about.
So whenever you judge, there's a judging aspect, but you walk out of there a smarter person.
I hope so. My general outlook is you can always learn something from someone, no matter how experienced you are, whether it's judging, if it's a class, even if it's a class that I'm taking, not so much for the technique because it's a technique that I'm already proficient in, but I really want to take the teacher or attend with the teacher, or I just happen to like the project. You can always learn something, whether it's from the teacher, from a fellow student. There's always something to learn.
Yeah. Now, as you're judging and you get a few shows under your belt, how do you keep yourself fresh? How do you keep from getting jaded and say, oh, here's 10 more reproduction samplers, spare me these things? How do you keep that edge?
I personally am never tired of seeing things. To me, it's all fresh. And even if it's something from a pattern 20 years ago that I recognize that I may have done, it's always exciting to me to look at it. I love it because as a judge, I am up close to that needlework. I have a magnifier. I get to look at every single detail and just soak it in. I don't get tired of it. I think if you get really, really tired of it, then maybe it's time to quit or move on, or maybe learn some new
Yeah.
techniques, or, try to judge other places. It's like, if you're working certain, like say, perhaps certain local shows that are very regular on like say county fairs or something, you start sort of seeing year after year certain people exhibit every year, like I used to do. And you start saying, oh, there's the lady that does that. Oh, there's the lady that does the machine embroidery. And oh, good, and that the woman that does the needlepoint is there. And
Yeah.
you sort of get the feel for things, even though you don't know who did it because you're not allowed to see it. And their names are always hidden, so it's always anonymous.
Right.
And if there's an initial, they try to cover it if it's stitched on there onto the piece. But it's always sort of exciting. You're kind of like, oh, yay, this person is back and that person is back. And, oh, that's something new. And oh, we have a new exhibitor. I haven't seen that type of work before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sure that if you've done enough of them, the regulars start to you can tell. Yeah, this is almost unavoidable. Yeah.
Yeah, and certain people have a certain style.
Right.
So, you can't help but suspect who it might be.
Yes, exactly. Now, you mentioned the tool of evil, the magnifier. That's the one that scares me. So describe that aspect of it? Literally big giant Sherlock Holmes magnifier going over every bit, or how does that work?
No, the first thing that we generally do is we hold it, kind of at arm's length or up close, depending on the size of the piece and whether it's framed or finished as an object. And sort of get an overall feel for it. And then we'll lay it in front of us or hold it. And we take just a handheld magnifier, maybe about 3-4 inches, maybe.
Okay. Okay.
And just enough to, we can't, if you're judging a piece, even if it's over a few days of, say, 350 or 400 pieces, you can't take an enormous amount of time on everything. But you kind of get a feel when you start looking at the piece as to the person's proficiency. And there's certain general things you look at. So say I'm looking at a piece that's needlepoint and it's mostly basket weave. So I have a few different techniques. I take my magnifier if I need it, and I have my glasses that I can see carefully with my bifocals. And, and I'll sort of skim around the piece, and I've done it enough for me because technical work is my love. Things sort of jump out at me if they don't look quite right. So if something is not stitched right, or there's a missing stitch, or a multi-legged stitch is missing a leg or crossed in a different direction, things like that to me seem to sort of jump out.
Okay.
And other times you're looking very closely to see, say it's a piece that is one of the they're kind of the it's like a solid picture, all cross stitch, like on linen with like either DMC or silk, but it's like a solid piece, like a picture. And I'll sort of skim over one of those to say, okay, are we missing any stitches? Are we crossed in the wrong direction if it's cross stitches, as I said it? And you can sort of go through the piece and you just sort of develop ways and instincts to see where things.
So then the magnifier, at least in your hands, is not a tool of microscopic inspection. It's a tool that allows you to get close enough to get a sense of what has been accomplished.
Exactly. And also, if we have several pieces that are scored pretty much the same every once in a while, and they're all very, very good, we have to make a decision sometimes as to a first, second, and third.
And now here we go. Okay.
And now you start looking a little closer for anything that perhaps may be not quite right. Yeah. Now, what I will say at this point, it is important to know that unless your piece is something where the back should be exposed, like say a hardanger or a pulled thread, like a table piece or something, we do not judge the back of your pieces. Most of the time framed, so we can't see them anyways. But if I can't see on the back what you've done on the front, we're good.
Okay, all right. So there's the dividing line, though. If right. What you did on the back influences the front, then now that's an issue.
Exactly. So if you've got something that's pulled with a little too much tension, if you have some eyelets that perhaps are not open evenly, if you have some cross stitches and some are loose and some are tight, or you're using more than one piece of thread in your needle and they're not laying just right and they're a little wonky wrapped around each other, that's the kind of things that we look for in technique.
Yeah. Okay. I'm a clean back person. I'm a freak about that.
Oh, yeah.
And then of course others, couldn't care less. But so there is that dividing line then, that if it starts to influence, then you got to do something about it. Yep.
Exactly. And you have to remember too, when you're doing needlework, people sometimes laugh when they look at mine. When I work on the bigger pieces that I know are going to eventually enter, because as a judge, I need to keep entering and getting feedback on my own work and being involved on that side of the judging experience as an exhibitor as well. The backs on those, because I've done the Master Craftsman and I've exhibited, I have excellent stitching habits. It's just the way I've learned, and I stitch a certain way when I know it's going to be exhibited. But if I'm making something for myself, like right now I have a project that I take with me if I'm waiting for my son at an appointment or we're traveling, and I have a little piece that I do in hand. Well, if that thread carries a little further along the back and it's not going to affect the front, it's not being exhibited, it's fine. And I've been stitching in shops, and I'll have someone come over and go, oh, Cindy's here, let's take a look at what she's working on. And darn it, they'll grab it and they'll flip it over and take a look at the back. I'm like, oh, that's rude. But they'll look at the back and they'll go, oh my gosh, look at what you've done. Why are those threads all over the place? I'm like, this is just for me. It's for fun. Go look at the other one. I'll bring the other one next week. You'll look at that one, and that one is spotless on the back.
Yeah.
It just depends. If you can't stitch everything perfectly unless it's going in an exhibit, because you won't have fun. You'll drive yourself crazy.
Yeah.
And the whole point of our love of needlework is to enjoy it and have fun. And if you're not enjoying it, then what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah, that whole look at the back thing, I know a lot of people really get their feathers ruffled. I don't care if you look at the back of mine, but I also enjoy looking at the back of other people's work, not to find fault, but it shows me how they go about their stitches.
Oh, yeah.
And so I learn from that and learn, all right, how are you moving from stitch to stitch? And because to me, that's very helpful in my own stitching, to be able to plot a path. And so I enjoy studying the backs, and it's never, oh, that's a mess. It's how are you going about this, and what can I learn that might make me more proficient, efficient, whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like all these, for so many of us, including myself, that love and perhaps own, I collect antique samplers along with scissors. I have a problem with antique scissors. Big problem. But I have a number of antique samplers, and I love it. You turn those over, and these little girls, these were their school samplers.
Right.
And you turn them over, and, they're just all over the place on the back.
Sure.
Yet they're gorgeous on the front, and 150, 200 years later, we're buying them and collecting them and loving them, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter.
Yeah. To me, there's so much entertainment if you get a chance to look at an antique at the back, because you can see the little girl.
Yes.
It might be all buttoned up on the front side, but you see the little kid who couldn't care less, just wants it done because they want to go play. And I just love that part. Yeah.
Yeah, the most favorite thing I've learned over the last year or so is I follow Nicola Parkman's videos and her company, and some of her technique videos are wonderful. As an experienced judge, I've been stitching since I was 7, and I learned this year, for some reason, the pin stitch has gotten past me for starting in it threads. And
handy little tool. Yes.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I don't have to flip my huge sampler over. So I'm still working on, sometimes it comes out better than others, and I'm still working on my own proficiency, and we'll see the piece that I'm working on right now. We'll see eventually that will be going into an exhibit whenever it's finished in a year or two. And let's see how that goes.
So the master judge still learning basic techniques. Okay. All right. That's comforting.
As I said, you can always learn something. Absolutely.
Yep. All right. Let's now see. I do this, and now we're going to run out of time. So let's talk about what are the things that you see when you judge that will help people.
Um, a lot of the basic things I see consistently, show to show, pet hair and fuzzies, lint,
Really?
caught on glass. That's a big one. And as someone with allergies, I hate it when there's pet hair because it makes me sneeze.
Okay, now that one surprises me that you would even have that on the list, but to bring it up first, so that is an issue then. Okay.
It is. And side by side with that, for those of us that I work on hoops and scroll frames, I do in hand everything. For people that work in hoops in particular, hoop marks,
Mm.
res from hoop marks, especially for people that like to do, say, stamped linens and things. If your materials are washable, wash them. We've had things that have been just, you know, dirty. We had a
Oh,
quilt once at a local show that looks like someone had taken it directly off their grandchild's bed and submitted it, and it was not pretty.
oh my. Oh my.
But but that's unusual to that extent. But yeah, clean. Make sure when you pick it up, if you have it framed and you have glass in front of it, make sure there's no residue behind it, no thread fuzzies that have gotten in. We will generally spot that, depending what it is and where it is in the scoring. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to take anything off for it, but we will see it, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Big thing is, say, cross stitch. Things cross, as I've said a few times, crossed in the right direction. No missing stitches. Correct compensation if you have compensating stitches. If you're doing anything, any type of pulled work, things that are pulled, you know, holes and pulled areas are consistent in size from one to the other. Trying to think of different types of needlework.
So then all right. So then in that instance, then we're looking at a technique specific things. So, for instance, if you're doing counted canvas work in needlepoint, then you would look for tension and open holes between elements, that kind of thing. Cross stitch, then obviously the crosses all need to go the same way. Tension. So there's overall factors, but then within each technique, there you know enough about the techniques that you look for those things that are good or bad within that technique.
Yes. And another thing that we see a lot of is worn threads. So if you're cutting your threads too long, they start to wear as you pull them through, whether it's silk or
Yes.
linen or canvas. They will start to wear. Don't cut your threads incredibly long. We will start to see a difference in the sheen and the consistency of the thread. That's a big one. And I have some examples of that for the Wednesday show to put on there.
Okay, so that was one that, because I'm very conscious of that, particularly with pearl cotton. But so that, and with a trained eye, then that really starts to stand out for you over the course of several pieces.
Yes, and you'll see, and you'll even start to learn on your own work. It's a matter of being aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see, and then you'll start to learn. You know, gosh, I'm cutting my piece at maybe 20 inches. Maybe I should cut it at 15 or 13. It's again, it's sort of a feel that each individual person develops depending on the type of thread you're using and the type of ground fabric you're using.
Yeah. I'm interested in the hoop marks. So that obviously you would think if someone's going to exhibit that they would make every effort to get them ironed out and removed, but I know some just never go away. So that just simply becomes an issue that can't be avoided, but it still affects the judging.
Again, it depends on what it is. Sometimes if it looks like the piece has been pressed and it hasn't come out, we try to take that into consideration. More so than that with hoops is you have to be careful because they do have a tendency to get those semicircular dirt marks just from the oils in our hands. And, you know, there's more things now where people are putting the covers, like the fabric covers around the edges.
Yeah, Q-snap covers, yeah.
Yeah, yep, exactly. And those things are wonderful. They help quite a bit. There's also some considerations in finishing where your framing or finishing work should not outshine the needlework, because the first thing that we should see when we look at a piece is your eye should always go to the needlework, not the big mat or the oversized frame or the enormous ribbons on top of
Okay.
things. That's sometimes
Yeah. All right. That's a good one because I see that from time to time where it takes me a minute simply to find the needlework. So that then has an impact on the judging. Okay. That the
exactly.
needlework should visually dominate.
Exactly. And again, that's speaking from a judge's perspective of a piece that is entered in an exhibit. If you have something finished and you want that feel and that's what you want, it's your piece. Have it finished the way you want, because you're the one who's going to enjoy it. The judge is only seeing it for a small amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Then it goes to the wall, hopefully at a public exhibit so the public can enjoy it. They don't care, they just want to see the needlework and what got ribbons and what didn't. And it's a social event, enjoy it. So have it done the way you want, but do be aware if it's completely overshadowed, it may affect the judging.
Yeah. Well, see, and that's something that is important in these kinds of discussions, I think, to keep on the table is just that. It's your work. You do it the way you want because it's going to be in your house a much longer time than in front of the judge. And so you have to make that determination. Am I doing this for me or am I doing this to be judged?
Exactly. And along with that, I did also want to bring up that if you are getting a written critique back on your work, I've heard it commented at times that perhaps the judge's comments are not welcome because I don't want to have negative feedback on my work. I don't want to hear the judges pick it apart. If you have a well-trained judge, and some places hire, judges, ANG judges, EGA judges, NAN judges that are experienced, other shows may not have as experienced of people that are volunteering to help because some shows are all volunteer. A proper judge, the way I was trained, is when I am critiquing something, whether it's a phenomenal piece or a piece that perhaps could use a little help, you want to find something that you like about it. You want to say something good and nice and encouraging, and then come in with a constructive criticism or critique, something that will be helpful. I noticed your cross stitches, I keep going back to that, but your cross stitches are perhaps not always in the same direction. So if you would like to improve your score next time, there's an easy way to pay attention to it. And then you close out with something nice, or I hope to see you judge again at the next show. The point is we want to encourage people. We want them to come back. We want them to exhibit. I don't want people to be afraid of having their work looked at with a critical eye.
Yeah. So then in the judging training, then that has to be a real point of emphasis and probably for most of us humans, a difficult thing to do that you have to keep in the front of your consciousness all the time is to be constructive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No one wants negative feedback. Even I don't want negative feedback.
Right.
If it's constructive, like, oh, I noticed you missed a stitch on the upper right corner where I looked at it so carefully. Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Things happen. It should also be a learning experience if you are getting feedback. And I think people don't always expect that we try to make a constructive comment to help you go to the next level. And I think that takes people by surprise.
Yeah. Talk about tension and maintaining the proper thread twist. Is that a problem for most people?
I think as people start to stitch more, they start to become aware of it. They start to notice if their tension is a little bit tight and then a little bit loose, like from one day to the next. A lot of people I know will notice that their thread starts tangling before they realize that it's untwisting or over twisting. Mm-hmm. That you need to either let it hang down and let that needle turn, or every couple of stitches give it like a quarter twist, the needle a quarter twist in your finger one way or the other to retighten it and keep it looking consistent. It's all a matter of awareness of what you're stitching and occasionally sort of sitting back from it a little bit and looking at it a little more freshly from a different perspective, so that you see if the texture or the sheen or the thread appearance has changed in any way and if it's something you can do. A big thing that I personally fight with is I do a lot of reproduction samplers lately, and I find certain colors of threads, when they're dyed, have a tendency to be a little bit of a tighter twist. Like I find reds, I fight with coverage on reds, and I'm always trying to twist or untwist to get proper coverage over solid areas than I would do perhaps with, say, a green or a gold thread. And I don't know why that is. It's something I need to look into, but that's something that I've noticed when I stitch that I'm working to compensate for, and how to do it with tension and with a twist.
Yeah. When it comes to cross stitch, if you're doing 2 threads, say 2 over 2 or whatever, and you'll see some people will just stitch. And if the threads cross over, they don't sweat it. Some people worry about just the top cross being parallel, and somebody railroad and lay. Some people railroad and lay everything. What role does that play in the judging? Does that have an impact on how you view a piece, or do you not worry so much about that with cross stitch?
No, it is something that we look at. If you're using more than one thread in the needle, we would like to see those threads laying side by side, whether it's a cross stitch or a satin stitch. It will affect your score a little bit on the technique. You know, it could only be dinged a point or two. Again, if we have a bunch of pieces that are at a similar level of technique, then we start looking at the pieces a little more critically to determine where the correct scores should fall for ribbon awarding.
Right. So then a piece where everything is laid properly versus somebody who just stitched is going to come to the top. Well, visually it'll come to the top anyway, but
that's one of the first things that I look for is in cross stitch. Are they all crossed in the same direction? Are any stitches missing if it's a very dense piece? And if it's multiple strands in the needle, are they all laying side by side nice and pretty?
Yeah. Do people...
That just shows a higher level of technique in stitching, that's all.
Yeah. Do people struggle more with, say, silk or, say, rainbow gallery things? Does that start to show up in the technique? Or how does that, different kinds of threads? I mean, we all start with cotton at some point, but do you see people struggle with silk? You know, reproduction samplers, a lot of silk used there.
Yeah.
How does that come to you as you're judging?
I don't necessarily see as much of a struggle. Again, it goes back to making sure you don't overuse the thread, so that if you're dealing with something that's very shiny or fluffy, that it's consistent. The big thing that I do notice occasionally is if you don't end it securely underneath the, on the back or under the other threads, depending on the stitch and where you're ending it. Sometimes a little end will poke through, or sometimes that last leg of the stitch will become loose, or the first leg of the stitch will be pulled a little tighter because you're putting a little extra tension when you give it that final little tug that we all do to seat the thread.
Right.
That's more what I notice.
Yeah. So all right, so I finished a piece. I've worked my butt off. I've finished it because I want to enter it. And very careful, I've really worked hard on it to get it just so. Before I package it up and send it off to the county fair, what are some basic steps I should do to make sure I haven't missed anything? Do I get out a magnifier? What are some of the things I should make sure to take one last look at?
Sure. That's an excellent question. Obviously, like I said before, make sure that if it's finished with glass or framed, no fluffs or hairs under it. I recommend taking a few days, even before you have it finished, set it aside for 2 or 3 days, look at it fresh, turn it, look at it straight, look at it on an angle, like a horizontal plane, look at it diagonally, take out, if you have a magnifier glass, take out a magnifier. Our cell phones that we all have with cameras are fabulous tools for shooting it in quadrants and then enlarging it. I do that all the time when I'm working on really tiny things. And I found things that have been missed and I've been surprised. So there you go. But yeah, check it. Another thing, if it's a really complicated piece and you think that you've done a really great job on it, it's always good to have a stitching friend take a look at it if you can too, because sometimes a fresh pair of eyes will catch something. It's like writing a letter or a paper. You may have a typo and your brain will keep seeing it as correct no matter how often you look at
Right,
it.
right.
Whereas if you let a friend or a partner read it, then they say, "Oh my gosh, the spell check didn't catch as it says an.
Right,
Oh my gosh, we missed it." Same
right,
thing in stitching, something that your eye will automatically just keep breezing right past, someone else may catch.
right. Yeah, as a magazine editor, that's rule number one. If you write something, you're your own worst editor.
So
Don't.
true.
You're the worst. You make sure someone else sees it, because there'll be 15 things that you didn't see because you've been over it so many times. You're just blind to them.
It's really true. And I also find with that, like I said at first, is setting it aside for a few days or even a
Mm-hmm.
week and then coming back to it. And then when you finally have the piece and you're ready, to drive out and drop it off at the exhibit or pop it in the mail, give it a final look over for the same things and make sure that it's clean. Make sure nothing got stuck behind any glass or plexiglass. There's nothing stuck on it. Everything's nice and tight as far as those ends. At that point, it might be too late to get into them. But yeah, I
Oops.
try and do most of my really, really good checking of things. I do it in phases. I finish something, I take a really good look at it. I set it aside for a week or two. I look at it again. I take photos of it. I'm pretty intense about it, especially if it's being judged. And then I look at it one more time before I take it to the framer. And then I'll look at the framers in a completely different lighting situation
Uh-huh.
while it's there. So, and then when I pick it up from the framer, because I have pets in the house, I have birds and I have a dog, and my house is dusty because we get a lot of wind here. I like to put plexiglass in front of my pieces. I don't use glass because we have earthquakes here in Southern California. So if it comes off the wall, it doesn't shatter.
Yeah.
But I will double check when I pick it up. My framers that I use are excellent. They do fantastic work. But I always double check that, just in case I see something in there that's not quite right, that I, can have them take care of it while I'm there. And I haven't had that happen, but because I see it as a judge, it gives me good habits to double check things before they leave the frame shop.
Yeah. Now that's an item, two schools of thought, glass or no glass. So you don't have an objection to having the piece covered if it's going to be judged.
No, you do need to very carefully read the exhibit guidelines. Some exhibits require you to remove any glass or plexiglass from the piece, or you will automatically lose X amount of points, and state that in the rules. Others say we prefer you take the front off it, but if you don't, there's no penalty, but we prefer that you don't have it. As a judge, it is much easier for us to have it without anything in the front because we can see it much better. We can see the textures of it. We can evaluate it very clearly. I'm not against judging things that have a glass or plexi on the front because like I said, that's how I frame my own pieces. Some of that museum glass is beautiful. Have a few pieces coming up that I finished during this past year that I've been waiting to take to the framer, and I just haven't wanted to drive down there. It's not close. And I'm going to look at the museum glass, but I understand it's very expensive, so we may or may not do that. But I have judged a few pieces with museum glass, and that stuff is just beautiful.
Yeah.
Just beautiful.
Yeah.
But not everyone can do that. So I don't mind judging stuff with something in front of it. If I have it completely up to me, I would definitely prefer to not have anything. My own pieces, when they go in, I will take them to the framer, have the fronts taken off and wrapped up, take them to the show, they get judged, they get sent back, they come home, and back we go down to the framer and they put the plexi back in for me.
Yeah, I was going to mention that most good framers will help you do that so you can meet the requirements and then have the glass or plexi that you want in your house. Yeah.
And I found the framers that I use, if They always appreciate if you mention to them that this piece is in the future. I am planning to put this piece in an exhibit. I may need to take the glass out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I don't know if they do anything different or not, but I always like to mention it so that if they do anything different to it in the framing process, that they know that they're at some point going to have that piece back, and the plexiglass is going to come and go a little bit on it a few times.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Cindy, thank you. Wow. I learned. I love it.
Good. That was the point. As long as we can learn something, right?
Yep. That's excellent. All right. So there it is, folks. There's your starter point. Now join us Wednesday night, the 28th at 8 o'clock Eastern time. Cindy will be back, and then we'll have photos, and you can she'll explain what she's seeing in the pieces, and then you can ask questions. And so between this show and then that video, then you really should have, already I have a nice little parcel of things to keep in mind, but you should have a real nice body of things that will help you be a better stitcher. Fantastic. Yay.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Gary.
Oh, thanks for doing this, and thanks to everyone for listening.